FSMA, I always like to take one step back before I present on FSMA. Why do we have FSMA? We had too much preventable foodborne illness. So that's the bottom line. If when you come to work and if you just are having one of those days, I urge you to listen to the beginning of any of the FSMA public meetings or the middle, but you have testimonials from people that have suffered from foodborne illness. It does not discriminate is what you're going to find out. At the last public meeting I attended, we had a woman that had just had a baby that got stricken with El Mono, ended up in the hospital for 3 months, couldn't breastfeed her baby. Baby didn't know her. When they were able to reunite. You had an elderly man that had just retired, wanted to travel the world, stricken with foodborne illness, will not be able to do what he wanted in retirement. It doesn't discriminate. That's why we're all here. That's why we have FSMA. We need to reduce preventable foodborne illness. So the role of the FDA policymakers, I'm from the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition right now. The scientists, the policymakers, is to, what FSMA calls us to do is put standards in place from farm through the distribution of food to retail. These are prevention-oriented standards that the industry must comply with. The role of FDA and state food safety regulatory staff will then, once we have the standards in place through the rulemaking process, then it's our role to make sure that industry is complying with these regulations, because we believe that if industry implements these prevention-oriented standards, then we will reduce foodborne illness or preventable foodborne illness. And of course, the role of the regulator training and curriculum. We want a well-trained, credible investigator, inspectorate, whatever you want to call it, investigators, inspectors. We want to perform inspections in a uniform manner, very much like you heard yesterday. We want consistent decision making, and that really is only fair to the industry. So I'm going to go over phase 1 implementation very quickly. That's the rulemaking and guidance phase. I'll then go over phase 2 implementation in a little bit more detail. That's the gaining and maintaining industry compliance with the rules. We have FSMA implementation guiding principles, and I want you to listen to those carefully because there's the culture shift we're looking for in the way we do inspections. I'll talk about industry training and technical assistance, regulator training and technical assistance, inspection and compliance enforcement. And I'm going to show you the strategies. These strategies have been approved by senior leadership in FDA. We're still working out the details, quite frankly. But there's still room for input, so if you have any, we'd like to hear it. And by the way, this is an hour presentation. If anybody has questions, just interrupt me. It's fine. Just ask them as we go. And then I'm going to show you a couple implementation strategies, preventive controls, that the preventive controls work groups and the produce safety work group have come up with, have sent forward, and again, these are all approved. So I'd like to start with and make sure everybody recognizes that in FDA, our food and feed program, and now we're calling it the human and animal food program, that's what we are branding ourselves at, crosses 2 directorates and 6 centers and offices. So 6 organizational components. And what we have done in the human and animal food program is created governance structures at the highest levels in the organization. So that would be Mel, who was here yesterday, the center directors, and the 2 directorate leads, Howard Sklamberg and Mike Taylor. We have a governance board. That's the highest governing bodies. And then we have an executive council, which Steve Solomon and myself, the deputies, kind of the second in charge in all the ORA, CFC, and CVM, sit on that. I just want to bring this up because our motto now is for the human and animal food program, we're going to speak with one voice. It's not going to be, ORA over here doing one thing and CFC and CVM over here doing another thing. At the very strategic decisions, any decisions that involve resources, that type of thing, we are going to be making those types of decisions together. And so that's why we have set up this governance structure. I think we're the only program in FDA that has set up such governance. And we're learning. It's a little painful sometimes, but we are learning. So just know that we have 2 levels of governance, that it represents all 6. We have representatives from all 6 components of the human and animal food program. So phase one is, again, a lot of you have seen this. We're looking at FSMA implementation as a phased-in approach, a continuum. Phase one was the rulemaking, continues to be guidance development, policy development. Phase two is now we have the rules. How are we going to oversee industry compliance with those rules? We do have a phase three, and we're really starting to get into that now. We are establishing performance, basically public health and compliance metrics, and to make sure that the strategies we are using to gain industry compliance with the rules are actually working. We will have a group of people that are really looking at whether our strategies are working. Are we gaining widespread industry compliance? This is new to us. We usually just put the strategies out, assume they're working, hope they're working. So we're going to be really monitoring this time through performance metrics. Again, I'm not going to talk about phase three. We're getting into that now, setting it up, and I'm really going to focus mostly on phase two. But phase one, everybody knows we have 7 regulations that will be coming out. 2 just issued September the 10th, 2015. That's your preventive controls for human food and preventive controls for animal food. So those are out there and on the road. Compliance dates will be kicking in for the largest firms in the next year. The other 3 that will be out in the next 4 to 8 weeks are Produce Safety Foreign Supplier Verification Program and third-party accreditation. And it looks like we're on target to get those out. We are under consent decree. The commissioner was sued in the agency basically because we were not meeting the established timeframes for getting the rulemaking done that were established through FSMA. The dates that you see for final, that's under the consent decree, and it's really just to get the rules to the Federal Register for publication. So as long as we get the rules to the Federal Register for publication, we're meeting the terms of the consent decree. Looks like we'll do that. They usually publish a couple weeks after we get them to the Federal Register. So I've had some questions about that. You didn't meet the consent decree for the preventive controls. Yes, we did. We actually had them there. It just took us a while to get them published. Now, the preventive controls rules, I'm not going to go into any detail. There's going to be plenty of training opportunities around these rules, but I do want to mention, because I think there's some confusion here, that they do establish, both of the rules for human and animal contain either modernized or new GMPs plus hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls. So just there's 2 pieces there. And for the human arena in particular, we are modernizing the GMPs, the 110s. 110 goes away. And just remember that 110 applies to everything. Seafood HACCP, LACF, et cetera, et cetera. So those new modernized GMPs apply to basically all food facilities that have to register. So don't get confused there. 110 will go away. And then we also have a revised definition of farm, and I'm not even going to get into that, but just know there's a revised definition for farm that impacts several of these regulations. And this is courtesy of Deb DeVlieger. This slide is just emphasizing the fact that we have modernized good manufacturing practice GMPs for human food, and it covers everything. So seafood, juice. You have to be trained on these, because any inspection you do in the future, you're going to have to know what these modernized GMPs are. Okay. I want to just quickly, we get a lot of questions around, are you going to have guidance around these preventive control rules, and what are you working on? So just very quickly, for human food facilities, the guidance that we're working on, there will be a hazard analysis and preventive controls guide. I don't even want to say it's going to be similar to seafood, because it will not be in that kind of detail, but there will be a guide coming out that will be helpful to the regulatory community. There will be guidance on environmental monitoring programs, food allergen control programs, validation of process controls, and of course we always have to put out a small entity guidance for those smaller players and helping them figure out what they have to do to comply. So that was human food, and this is just for your reference. I'm not going to go over this in any detail, but you do have timelines in the slides that relative to phased-in compliance. It's phased-in compliance for the human preventive controls rule based on the the size of the firm, and that's the way they define the size of the firm is complicates things for FDA, to put it lightly. We do not collect information in the way they have defined firms. They define very small and small firms pretty specifically, and then they don't even say large firms, they say other. And it's based on the number of employees under what I'm calling the corporate structure. So it's subsidiaries and affiliates. So think of your crafts out there basically anybody that has more than 500 employees is considered in this other category, which is what we would look at kind of as a large category in the past. They have 1 year to comply with this regulation. And I think what complicates things here is, so you will have a craft that has 200 facilities under it, subsidiaries and affiliates, and some of those might be small or very small. They all have to comply with the rule within a year. So there's really some arms to this regulation. So anyway, this is for your reference. Bottom line, by 2019, everybody has to comply. That is covered by the regulation with go ahead, Joe.
And we just want to also add that it also includes seasonal employees as well as contractors. So this definition of corporation and a number of employees really extend out beyond what you would normally deem to be an employer-employee relationship.
Yeah, and let me just put a plug out for our FSMA website now. We keep up-to-date information on that website. There has been a ton of questions about this size issue, so we are getting Q&As ready around that. So just pay attention to that FSMA website. We are working hand in hand with our general counsel to get Q&As clear pretty much every day, it seems like. So for the animal food facilities, there's going to be guidance in these areas. GMPs are new to most of the animal food industry, so we will have a guidance document on GMPs for animal food facilities. Human food byproducts for use as animal food, that's been very controversial. We will have a guidance document around that. We will have a guidance document around hazard analysis and preventive controls, kind of the controls guide like for seafood, and then the small entity compliance guide for the smaller players, and again, telling them how to help them comply with the rule. And here's the timeline for the animal food facility preventive controls rule. And the one thing that's very different here is where there's compliance dates that are phased in not only based on the size of the quote-unquote enterprise or entity, but we're phasing in compliance for GMPs separate from preventive controls. So they have 1 year to comply with GMPs, and then the next year for each size category, they have let me just do the larger, say the larger or other players. They have 1 year after the rule was published in the Federal Register to comply with GMPs, and then they have another year to comply with preventive controls, and it phases out for the small and the very small. So just, again, these timelines are for your reference. We're going to be putting out quite a bit of information to make sure everybody's clear on who has to comply. But I can tell you, relative to FDA, we don't collect information the way they have defined the sizes of the enterprises, for lack of a better word. So we really recognize that we're going to have to basically ask a question when we go out to these facilities. Do you have more than 500 employees? And if you do, then we know, they'll have to be in compliance with modernized GMPs. You're literally going to have to figure out what to inspect under after you ask this series of questions to figure out whether or not they're small, very small, or large. So we have an ideal, but again, we're probably going to have a series of questions the investigator has to ask to really figure out what they need to be in compliance with during this first 3 to 5 year period. So that's it. That's all I'm going to talk about phase 1. More rules to come. A lot of outreach already happening on the rules. Webinars are going on all over the place. We're doing FSMA chats. So just keep your eye out for all of that. Phase 2 FSMA implementation. This is the effort that Joanne and I are co-leading. And this is now we have rules. How are we going to maintain or gain and maintain industry compliance with the rules? So this is a structure, probably a lot of you have seen this. I just talked about the high-level human and animal food program governance bodies. That's the Food and Vet Medicine Governance Board and Executive Council, the Steering Committee. That's what Joanne and I co-lead with several others that stood up in the room. And then under us, and this is the Steering Committee directs a number of work groups, and they have been formed around the rules for the most part. So intentional adulteration, import controls, that's an exception. I'll talk about that in a minute. Preventive controls, we have a human food and animal food arm. We're setting up sanitary transport under preventive controls. And then we have produce safety, and we can't forget sprouts. The sprout portion is under the produce safety rule. So don't expect to see it under the preventive controls. It's sitting under the produce safety rule. And actually the compliance dates kick in pretty quick for that one. So we have all those work groups going. We have co-leads. The co-leads are usually somebody from ORA and somebody from one of our centers. So our centers are kind of the policy science folks, and ORA executes the science and policy. They are our boots on the ground. And that's on purpose, that we have the operations expertise and the policy science folks together co-leading the effort. We task them with developing frameworks, multi-year implementation plans for all of these various categories. So education, outreach, technical assistance for industry, training for the regulators, IT, performance goals and metrics, inspections, compliance, and enforcement. And what's guiding FSMA implementation is program alignment, which is an FDA initiative I'll talk about in a second, as well as a FSMA operational strategy document. Information on both of these are available publicly on our website. Okay, so program alignment, the commissioner issued a memo, which again is public, February 2014, and what I really want to emphasize in that is she instructed the leadership of FDA to create vertically integrated commodity-based programs. And one of those programs is the human and animal food program. Okay, and while doing that, we are specializing our inspection and compliance staff and our regulatory labs. So we will now have an inspectorate that does human and animal food program work exclusively, just like we will have one that does pharmaceutical work, medical device work. In the past, for the most part, I'm not going to say there's never going to be any generalists, who knows, but for the most part, we want to specialize everybody. It's just too much to take in multiple programs anymore. Even foods is very, very complicated in and of itself. To maintain your expertise, there's no way you can really maintain expertise in multiple major FDA commodity areas. So that's all I really want to say about that. I should say that Joanne and I actually are the co-leads for the program alignment initiative for the human and animal food program, which means we're the head of the negotiation team. There's others in the room that are on the negotiation team. We create annual plans, and this is to really move forward with this concept of a vertically integrated commodity-based program. We were put in charge on purpose to make sure what we're doing on the FSMA implementation side is going in the same direction as program alignment. And if we do program alignment right, we will, in my mind, we're not going to have any problem with FSMA implementation. So again, it's really all about breaking down the silos. We are one program. We bring different things to the table, the centers and ORA, but we need each other to do our work. And then the FSMA operational strategy document, I'm not going to say a whole lot about that, but it's on our website. It does set the foundation for how the FSMA Phase 2 work groups were instructed to develop their implementation strategies and frameworks. It captures at high levels our current thinking and strategy. There's an appendix. The appendix gets into a little bit more detail on the guiding principles for implementation strategies for produce safety, preventive controls, and the import controls group. So take a read of that if you haven't read it. It's in draft. It will remain in draft. It evolves, honestly, and it already has evolved. So key implementation principles. I'm summarizing this in one slide. And again, I just want you to listen for kind of the culture shift, change For some investigators, I don't like to say one size fits all, because I would say every investigator and inspector has their own little approach anyway, honestly. And some approach their job, you know, in a very open, communicative way. Others maybe not so much. But this is what we're talking about for implementation. You're going to hear in the next couple slides a little bit of the culture shift change. And what I want folks to think about is how are those behavior changes reflected in the training as we develop courses and think about competencies and curriculum. So we are out there very publicly saying we're going to facilitate industry compliance with the rules through guidance, developing tools and resources for education, outreach, and technical assistance. So tools for industry, educating industry. That is one way to gain industry compliance. It's not all about inspections. So education, outreach, technical assistance for the industry. Developing and implementing explicit inspection and enforcement strategies that facilitate consistent decision-making by regulators. It's not all about the training, honestly. If your inspection approaches aren't explicit enough and your compliance strategy, you're going to get folks doing all kinds of crazy things out there, and you know the industry is not going to get that consistency that in decision-making that they desire, and I believe they deserve. We will invest in training for regulators, and that's federal, state. When we're talking regulators, we are talking federal and state, so I'm just going to put that out there. We will invest in training for regulators that promotes consistency and regulatory approach and decision making. So you heard a lot about this in the training arena yesterday. We will work closely with the industry, and this causes people a little bit of grief, government agencies, academia, and other key stakeholders and partners. So as we're implementing these and trying to gain industry compliance with these rules, we are working with industry in a very different way, I can tell you that, than I've ever seen. We recognize the role of the marketplace in influencing and expanding industry compliance with FSMA and rules. So we are out there saying we are going to try to figure out how to leverage with the private and public third-party audit system. So you keep hearing audit fatigue out there, audit fatigue. We've got to learn more about the system and see if we have comfort in that system at all and how we might use that information principally for risk-based targeting. So, you know, how often we visit a firm, what we do when we're in a firm or farm. And then we're going to develop meaningful public health and performance metrics to measure success. So those are key implementation principles that all of the work groups have heard. Now let me get into a little bit more specific. FSMA implementation guiding principles. This is for industry, education, outreach, and technical assistance. We will facilitate industry compliance with the standards or the rules. Again, as I mentioned, through guidance, developing tools, resources for education, outreach, technical assistance. Now, I already talked about the guidance documents we're going to be developing. Those are both for the regulators and the industry. I want to talk a little bit about alliances, private-public alliances that are going to help with the industry, education, outreach, and technical assistance, and technical assistance networks. So the alliances that have been formed and that FDA is supporting is Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance, Produce Safety Alliance, Sprout Safety Alliance. They are all, you know, associated with a university, either Cornell or Illinois Institute of Technology. They bring together a variety of stakeholders, federal, state, academics, industry, etc. They are developing now, Jerry told me, don't say curriculum. They are developing courses around, because curriculum means multiple courses usually, but courses around the various rules. And really what they're doing, their audience is industry. It's small and medium-sized industry for the most part. And it's basically, this is what the regulation says, and here's how to comply with it. So they're going to teach them how to do, you know, develop food safety plans, do a hazard analysis, that type of thing. So it is industry focused. What I want to emphasize is we expect every regulator to sit in the room with the industry at these alliance courses, and FDA, if funds permit, we get FSMA monies, we're going to support that both for FDA and the state.